Well, hello and welcome to another week of our Growth Accelerator series, where we are talking with industry experts on any number of topics, ranging all the way from today's topic of people management skills to other growth-related topics. And today we're very excited to have James O Donnell on with us. James is the co-founder and managing partner at Integrev, and throughout his career, he has had a lot of experience building revenue teams with all sorts of companies, ranging from seed funded to F100. And he's had a lot of titles along the way as well: CRO, CCO, SVP of operations, VP of support services, and a lot of others. So with so much leadership experience under your belt, James, we're very excited to have you on today to talk about people management skills and some of the things that you've learned along the way. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I think to kind of frame up our conversation for today, I would love to know a little bit from you, kind of what you think are some of the foundational or key qualities of an effective leader when it does come to people management, because I think there's often a common misconception that anyone who is good in their career will become a good manager of people. And I think anyone who's worked, though, has experienced someone who's maybe not quite as skilled when it comes to people management. So what do you think are some of those kind of key foundational qualities?
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree. And I think everybody has had that experience of a good manager and a poor manager. At least I hope they've gotten to experience both. And I know for a fact I have been both. So anything that I've learned through my own mistakes. I think the number one attribute for effective people management, which is completely different than what your subject matter expertise may be, is consistency. If you're going to be a jerk as a people manager, you got to be a jerk consistently. If you're going to micromanage, you have to micromanage consistently. If you're going to be totally hands-off and chill, same thing, right? The number one quality that I see that distinguishes any kind of strong people manager versus ones who are not is how consistent are they in the way that they manage.
Why do you think that is? Because I don't know that I've ever heard someone say that before. I think a lot of times you might hear things like, they understand people, or they're motivated by, the idea of wanting good for the people on their team. But consistency is a little bit of a less common one. So what is it about that?
It's a couple of things. What is it that your people really need from you? And what is the internal dialogue that they may be having with you that you may not even actually be a part of, right? Let's assume that you hired people who are high performers who want to do a good job, and that you have agreed to what the definition of a good job is. Then what they're looking for from you is the reinforcement and the feedback loop, and we'll probably end up talking about that more, so that they have a sense of, am I doing what we agreed was a good job? And if so, then what did I do to get there? And if not, what can I do to get there? And when you're inconsistent, then you are essentially introducing insecurity to a person's internal dialogue, and then it's going to affect their performance, right? If I don't know who's going to show up, am I going to get happy, Marina, or angry, or what have you, then I'm going to be less effective at my job, and we're just not going to have a stronger and more trusting relationship anyways.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And, I was going to talk to you a little bit about kind of how you might think that people management skills need to evolve as a company is growing, right? Because the majority of the companies that we're working with in our team ourselves were, early stage, quickly growing and evolving kinds of companies. But I think that's such an interesting point, like around the point of consistency, because it probably makes it all the more important if you are in a rapidly and changing environment, right? That like your management style stays steady, so that even if all these other things are changing constantly, like the person that you're reporting to or the person that is reporting to you, like there's that kind of foundation of trust, to your point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a couple of different points where it's really difficult and really important. One would be when you go from peer to manager, right? Which a lot of people experience relatively early in their careers, where you are now responsible for managing people that you used to work with
Mm-hmm.
have this weird transition relationship where it's like, we both used to bitch about the boss, but now I am, and I'm going to have to tell you that, and our relationship needs to change. That's
Mm-hmm.
one. And then the other one for this audience is, being the boss, right? And I think the hardest thing to do if you're a founder as your company grows is really learn and implement the distinction between transparency and clarity. And so what I mean by that is a lot of people think either I have to keep everything secret from my team because I don't want to worry them, or it's none of their business, or they're going to use it against me, or something that's kind of, fear-based. Or they go the opposite direction and they say, I'm going to tell everybody everything that's going on because, we're that kind of transparent, trusting space, and they deserve to know. And in fact, both are equally counterproductive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think about it, pure transparency means you're just running into glass walls, right? Mm-hmm. Clarity means thinking about the people that you're working with and giving them the insight that they need in order to be as effective as possible, right? And so why are we doing certain things, and what are the implications of those certain things, and how do I fit into them, and what are the consequences, and what are the opportunities? That's providing clarity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Giving people P&L anxiety that you live with every day as a founder is transparency, but it's not
productive. Yeah.
And that can be a hard one for people to balance, right? How much clarity do I give so I don't feel like my team feels like I'm hiding things from them, but at the same time, how do I not show and tell absolutely everything, because that can be just as counterproductive.
Yeah. In your experience, have you found that there's been any kind of like framework that you've used to know where that line is? Because to your point, I think that's probably the hardest part, right? Is having some of the, I don't even know what it would be, just the intelligence or the foresight to kind of know where the line is.
Like all things, practice makes perfect, or at least it makes better. And so the more you try to find that balance, the more likely you are. I don't think there's a one size fits all. It's also going to change as your team changes, because every new hire into your organization is going to in some way change the dynamic of that organization. And so you kind of need to accommodate that, right? One thing I do think is more effective than people realize is calling out exactly what you're doing, right? So I'm a big proponent of saying, hey, I'm trying to balance the right amount of information that I'm providing you all so that you feel like you understand what's going on and have influence and authorship and license. But at the same time, I don't want you swimming in every piece of information, because some of that is just, it's my job, not yours. So you may see that I'm kind of going through this process. That's what it is. I'm still learning too. Right. And if you are, again, to go back to the first point, if you're doing that kind of thing consistently and you're calling out what's actually happening, right? There's that, that's using your own vulnerability in a very engaging way, a very intelligent way.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought too. I think it's difficult to want to be vulnerable as a leader, right? Like, I think there's maybe a little bit of an inherent fear of stepping out of this idea of yourself as this like strong leader or something, and like allowing people kind of behind the curtain a little bit on some of the things. And to your point, there's a line where that's inappropriate and counterproductive to people's, effectiveness in their roles. But using some amount of vulnerability really as like a tool to bring the team together to instill trust, I imagine that's like a big purpose of it.
Yeah, for sure. And you got to give to get, right? You're going to expect people to perform at levels that they probably never have, and very likely in roles that they've never had. And that is a position of vulnerability as well,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You, since you've mentioned consistency a number of times through this and stuff, and you mentioned also like the way that the whole feel of an organization can shift, especially on smaller teams as new people are added into the equation. What does it look like to, prioritize consistency as a leader while also managing different types of personalities?
That's a big question. So I'll start by saying one thing is, if you have a team of 5, you are in 6 relationships, one with each of the individual members, and then one with the collective. Okay. And so you need to be having a consistent conversation with the collective, just like you should be having a consistent conversation with each of the 5 members, right? But the private conversations that you have with the 5 members may be very different from one another, and maybe a little bit different than the collective. In terms of managing your conversation with individuals and matching their style, I think inviting them into that conversation and asking them, what do you need from me, can be really helpful. Because you're going to find there are some people that need a cheerleader. There are other people that need a coach. There are other people that just want the thought space to share ideas. They're looking for an intellectual peer. So at the very least, I think having them contribute to what is the nature of our conversation is valuable.
Yeah.
I think beyond that, you have to get a sense by having worked with them for a little bit, what actually works.
Yeah. When, I guess if someone is either they're just starting out, they've made that like peer to leader transition that you mentioned earlier, or, maybe they are farther into their career, but they're not quite as, like developed as a people leader as they would like to be. Even though there are different types of personalities, and to your point, some people might be looking for a cheerleader or a coach or, whatever it might be. What are the starting frameworks that you would recommend to people when it comes to giving feedback or just, managing people? Like where should people start?
2 different questions in there. With the feedback one, the place where you should start is ask before you answer. Right. What I have found is people find it very difficult to listen if they don't feel like they're being heard. So when I'm going in to give feedback to somebody, it's probably driven by a specific event. And before I give my take on the event and the outcome, I want to know their take on the event and the outcome. Right. So I'm going to start by saying, hey, I want to talk to you about X. Tell me about that. Right? Break it down for me from your perspective. What happened? What did you do? Why did you do it? And what was the outcome as you see it? Right? And that's really useful for 2 reasons. One, like I said, because you're giving them a chance to speak and to be heard, more importantly, before you're asking them to listen. And then 2, you're going to uncover insight that you may not have had, right? Yeah. Now that insight may be, oh, I totally misread this situation, and thank God I didn't come in guns blazing because I would have looked like a jerk, right? Yeah. It could also be, oh, actually, this is my fault because I said, if A, then do B, and that was an A situation. So I need to go back and figure that out, right? It just, more often than not, it comes from the need to give constructive criticism more than positive feedback. Comes from there's a misalignment in what we thought should happen in a given set of circumstances. And then rather than assuming I know where that deviation was, I want to figure it out. So I would say first and foremost, if you want to get better at giving feedback because you just want to keep getting better at it, or because you haven't done it very often, start by asking, not by answering. That's the biggest one. Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I'm pretty sure anyone who's been working any amount of time has experienced had the experience of a supervisor coming in with an accusation And I think flipping that on its head where they come in with curiosity or something is so powerful in changing the dynamic of that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think also establish a framework before you ever implement that framework can be really valuable as well. And so what I mean by that is when I'm working with somebody for very early on, right? Like in the first couple of days of our relationship, I will tell them, hey, here's a couple of things that I want you to know, right? I'm going to be giving you feedback pretty consistently, and I'd like you to give me feedback pretty consistently as well. And I'd like you to bring things up. Don't keep it a secret. Don't keep it in your head, right?
Yeah.
And if I ever say something to you that you don't understand or you don't agree with, don't live with it. Let's have that conversation, right? There are times when I will give that feedback immediately on the desk. There are other times when it's a little bit longer term, then maybe that's what we use our one-on-ones for, okay?
Yeah.
For the most part, I'm not going to give you feedback unless you ask for it via an email, right?
Yeah.
So I'm also telling you what is my framework is I give feedback in person, as close to in real time as possible. There are certain circumstances where it is intentionally not in real time. And that's because we want to step away from the situation. We want time to have passed. We want to separate ourselves and say, let's actually now intellectualize this a little bit and break it down rather than implement as quickly as possible in a specific event. So actually saying, here's how I give feedback. Here's when I give feedback. Here's when I don't give feedback can be really, really useful in one, you getting more consistent at it because you just said, this is what I'm going to do, right? But then also people understanding that they should expect it.
Yeah. Do you have recommendations if you're coaching someone on, who's becoming a leader? Do you have recommendations on how often that feedback comes, or you have the mindset that it should come like more frequent, like side of too often versus not enough, or versa?
I think obviously there's an extreme, but more is better. The thing that I've realized is if you don't give feedback, then they're going to create their own feedback loop. And really what you're trying to do with people management is you're trying to influence their behavior, right? And so you want to be a voice in their head, and you want that voice in their head to reflect your actual voice as much as possible. And if you don't provide that voice, then they're going to. And the probability is you're going to be a much worse voice in their head if they make it up than if you actually are a part of it, right? I also think that it depends on what you are trying to accomplish. So for instance, if I am trying to affect what you do, then I want to give you that feedback as close to the moment where I need you to do it as possible, right? So if we're in a sales environment, as an example, and I want to give you feedback the moment you hang up that call, if what I'm trying to say is say this instead of that next time, give it a shot. Right? If it is, how do you think about things? So not what do you do or what do you think, but how? Then I need space, and that's more going to be a one-on-one, and it's not as important that it is close to the immediacy. It's more likely that I just need relevant examples we can reference rather than one specific example that we're addressing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Have you, I'm not sure whether your company operates remotely or not, but our company and a lot of the companies that we work with, either have a fully remote team or a large portion of their team is working outside of a, shared office. And have you grappled kind of with how that can affect the ability to like deliver feedback in a timely manner, or just have, I guess, any ideas on how the shift to more remote work has affected kind of how people need to think and operate to be an effective leader?
Yeah, it's definitely harder for two reasons, both which are pretty obvious. Number one, it's harder because getting undivided attention in a remote situation is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Right. Incredibly difficult. Two is environment is incredibly important. Right. You don't have the ability to say, let's go chat and go for a coffee and walk around the block. Right.
Yeah.
Versus let's go into a conference room versus let's just do this at my desk or your desk. And those environments are a tool that you need to be using explicitly when you give feedback. Right. So there are things that you have to do in a remote setting that accommodate as best as possible. That is completely different, right? So there's a couple of things like your tone of voice makes a huge difference because you don't have as big a benefit from body language, right?
Yeah.
How you are sitting. Are you sitting up straight or are you saying like leaning back? Whether or not you're on camera.
Yeah.
You know, if it is relatively, you want something to be more casual, then probably the easiest way is say like, you don't have to be on camera. Just, you know, I don't care if you're laying on your couch right now. Yeah. Versus what we're doing right now is probably the most formal that we can really get in a remote environment. So you have to think about what are the versions that I have for formality and structure in a remote environment that I might not have.
Yeah.
In the others.
Do you think that it changes at all, like the amount of feedback that people need, or are you just more of the mindset that, you know, the way that you deliver it, you need to pay closer attention to?
I think it's more the latter. I think it's more the latter. But to your point, actually, you bring up something else, which is the big mistake I think people make is the amount of feedback that they give is on a curve like that, and it drops off, right? When they first start, you get a lot of feedback, a lot of coaching, a lot of training. And then we make the mistake of thinking that high performers aren't high maintenance. And so as they get better at their job, we stop giving them, or we give them less and less and less feedback as if they don't need it. But that's incorrect.
Yeah.
The type of feedback that they need may change, but the need for feedback at all has not changed.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you, you know, so many founders or other leaders at like early stage companies, you know, they're overscheduled as it is. So how do you coach people through like carving out that time for feedback? Because my guess is that it's one of the first things that slips off of a lot of people's radar, right? Like, especially with high performers, like you just mentioned.
In my experience, people have to learn from the consequences of not investing in it. And how that materializes is they say, I'm so busy and I have all of these people and they're just causing more work for me as well, right? Because either I'm having to do their jobs for them, or I'm having to put out fires, or I'm having to clean up messes, or they're not causing trouble, but they're just not performing at the highest level. And all of that is really expensive, you know? So you are literally spending the capital to build out this team, to have these people with the understanding that they're going to perform at their highest level.
Yeah.
So why would you not invest what you needed in order to get that out of them? And by the way, you cannot hire somebody who is so amazing that they don't need feedback.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if they've been doing it for 2 years or 20.
That's a good point. I'm curious too, like creating this like an amount of vulnerability between leader and employee. As you do that, what pitfalls do a lot of people fall into when they are a leader who starts to actually receive feedback from the people under them, especially if that feedback is constructive criticism? Do you find that is a difficult thing for most people to kind of learn to walk through and embrace?
Yeah. And you're going to continue. I mean, we all have an ego of some sort, right? And if we're being very honest, leaders, especially founders, probably have a bigger ego than most, right? And I mean that in the one like outsized level of confidence, but the flip side of that is sensitivity, quite frankly. And it takes a lot of, you take a lot of hits in order to develop some level of numbness, right?
Yeah.
But I think what can be helpful is understanding that even when it's personal, it's not personal, right?
Yeah.
You may be failing as a leader in a particular environment. That doesn't actually mean you are a failure as a person. So when you get feedback to the effect of, can you do your job better, please? Right? Know that it is a criticism of your job performance, not your personal value. And I think that helps. I think there's also the danger of arrogance, which is, well, I am leading you and I am smarter than you. And so I'm supposed to know my job better than you're supposed to know my job. And that whole thought process is counterproductive.
Right.
Because my job is to remove obstacles and create opportunities for you as your management leader. So who better to tell me what the obstacles are, right? And that's where constructive feedback comes back to me, is somebody saying, there's an obstacle in my way that you're not helping me get rid of. And by the way, you're the obstacle, right? So it's like, oh, okay. Number one reason why I exist in your world is remove obstacles, create opportunities.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because at the end of the day, like, it is people management, right? Like, it's a relationship of some sort. It's a professional one, but it's still a relationship. And I've benefited in particular from a very effective leader who really helped me to like shift my mentality of what that relationship should look like. Because when I would give him feedback, and he was very good, to your point, of trying to encourage like the people under him to provide feedback. And he started framing those conversations as like, it's an opportunity for me to care for you. And I think that's kind of what you're hitting on, right? Is like, if my goal is to unhinder you to be able to perform at your highest, like, this is part of my job, is to know how I can do that. And the more you are clear and communicative about that, the more I can do my job of making sure you do yours.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
So if there's I know we're kind of running up at the end of our time together, but I'm curious if we've talked about a lot of things, and if a leader is listening to this conversation and they're aware, as most of us are, that there's a lot of areas that we could improve when it comes to our people management skills. How should they get started? Where should they kind of zero in? And is it the consistency piece? Is it something else? Like, how should they get started?
I think, yes, consistency, right? Two, practice. And I don't just mean practice in real life, like give feedback in order to get better at feedback, but rehearse before you give feedback. And choose what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And scenario plan it, just like you would if, I'm sure you rehearse before you go into an investor pitch or a prospect customer pitch or anything else, right? Rehearse, practice, think to yourself, not just how does this sound, but how is this going to be heard? And what is it that I really want here? And don't be afraid to grab a significant other or a peer or call me and say, hey, James, I got to give this feedback. I've never given it before. Can we just role play this? Right. Because that will absolutely help you get better at it. Yeah. And you're giving yourself more reps. So you're building that consistency. And then the other thing that we touched on that I think is really important is figure out what your framework is. You can change it later, but setting the expectations with your team and with the individuals on it is going to help both of you do a better job.
That's great. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on today. I know I've benefited a lot from the conversation, and for anyone who's tuning in live or watching the recording a little bit later, there's been a lot of great content. So thank you so much for joining. And for anyone else tuning in, we'll be back every Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, with a different industry expert. I believe next week is going to be focusing on SEO. So tune in next Thursday if you're watching this live. But James, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.